good afternoon, World Leaders, to our Inner Core series. As leaders, we encounter many added stresses in our day-to-day lives, making it that much more vital for us to focus on maintaining a healthy state of well-being. As we've heard previously, sleep is an important factor in maintaining that well-being. Today, we build on Tuesday's core series session with a specific focus on you as our leaders. We'll take a deeper look at the impact of unhealthy sleeping habits and disorders and how we can be made aware of this and encourage a healthy culture around prioritizing sleep in our teams. If you're able to join Tuesday's core series session, you may recognize today's speaker, Tanya Murr. Tanya is a sleep occupational therapist and a qualified occupational therapist from Wits University. She qualified in 2012. After gaining her experience in both adult rehabilitation and pediatrics, she realized that most of her clients required sleep intervention, as sleepiness and poor routine had a significant impact on her clients' road to recovery. She completed an advanced diploma in pediatric sleep training, studied sleep neurobiology and the assessment and intervention for sleep disorders, and will soon be accredited as a fatigue management consultant by BSS Africa. Assisting Tanya in facilitating today's session, whom you may recognize from the last Inner Core session, is Marina Pretorius. Marina is a highly experienced industrial and organizational psychologist with a demonstrated history of working with the human resources industry and consulting. She's currently consulting for us at Ball Property Group and working closely in partnership with the group human capital team. Without further ado, ladies, thank you for coming and being with us today. Over to you.
Thank you very much for having me again. I so enjoyed Tuesday's session, so I was really looking forward to doing this one as well. And I hope it's as valuable for you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can, Tanya.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, so today's program includes an introduction to sleep health and specifically in the workplace. And we're going to look at your own sleep and whether it affects your work and how it affects your work. We will then break away into groups to share our experience of sleep and productivity. Then when we reconvene, we will have a look at how sleep loss can affect teamwork and some strategies that can be introduced to ensure sleep deprivation is avoided so that we ensure optimum productivity and economical saving for the company. This will be discussed in small groups again, and then we'll have some time for feedback and questions. So when we look at productivity, here's an interesting stat about the link between productivity and sleep loss. In the United States, sleep deprivation costs the economy $411 billion a year. Now, of course, that's not our country, but when you know that 1 in 3 adults in most Western populations are affected by sleep deprivation, you can be sure this is affecting your company too. Something that happens when you have sleep deprivation and your brain desperately needs more sleep is an involuntary sleep onset. In other words, your brain just falls asleep. And it's only for a microsecond, and we actually call these micro sleeps. So it's a quick and involuntary, you don't choose to do it, your brain just falls asleep. You may have experienced this while driving. You kind of think, I don't remember the last couple of seconds. You might just notice it at other times of the day where you actually feel yourself nod off. Sometimes these microsleeps can even happen with eyes open and the brain itself just falls asleep for that quick second. And that's a big sign of serious sleep deprivation. And the results of that are danger, of course, if you're operating machinery, for example, or driving, embarrassment, and unprofessionalism if this happens in a meeting or with clients, inaccuracies, and therefore lower productivity. So in conclusion, with just a few of these points, we know that your workplace needs employees to be sleeping well. That's for sure. So what we're going to do now in this first little session is, as leaders, we need to build self-awareness so that we know what it feels like, perhaps, or we can empathize with our team. And so we're going to think carefully about our own situations. and look at how your sleep might be. So what we're going to do is look at a question set, which is adapted from an official sleep questionnaire that is used in assessment. And what we're going to do is rate how likely you are to doze off during certain situations. So if you have a little notepad and pen, that's great. Then you can write down your score for each one. If you don't, you can maybe just open the little notepad or memo or Word document or wherever you can jot down a few numbers on your computer. And what you're going to do is look at the situation and think carefully about your own sleepiness. And this is during the day. So this is when it's inappropriate to be sleepy. And you're going to rate what is the chance of you dozing off. And this is, we're looking in the last sort of 2-3 weeks. So it's not, it's not before that, it's kind of recently. You'll put a 0 if there's no chance you would fall asleep doing that. A 1 for a slight chance that you might doze off. A 2 for a moderate chance of dozing. And a 3 for a high chance that you'll nod off. All right, so hope you're ready. Let's have a look at some of those situations. The first one is sitting and reading. What is the chance that you would nod off while sitting and reading? The next one is watching TV. This is a common one. A lot of people fall asleep while watching TV, and it's mostly because it's at the end of the day, and it's quite a mundane activity, and doesn't require interaction or feedback. The third one is sitting inactive, but in a public place. So for example, in a movie theater or even in a meeting. What is the chance that you would nod off in one of these places? Number 4 is as a passenger in a car for an hour without a break. So without stopping, just traveling for an hour, but as the passenger, how likely are you to nod off? And this is obviously while traveling during the day. Number 5, lying down to rest in the afternoon when circumstances permit. So when you're able to, and you're not distracted, and you just have a lie down, how likely are you to doze off? And number 6, sitting and talking to someone. So this is obviously quite severe. If you're actually talking and listening and there's an interaction and feedback, how likely are you to fall asleep during that? Number 7, nearly at the end, sitting quietly after a lunch without alcohol. As we know, alcohol can bring on sleep. So now we're talking about not having had a drink at lunchtime, but just sitting quietly after you've finished your food and at lunchtime, and how likely are you then to nod off before starting your work again? This is also a fairly common one, and if you were in Tuesday's session, you'll remember that there is a dip in alertness during the afternoon, but normally it's not enough for us to go to sleep unless we have a lot of sleep pressure. And the last one, in a car while stopped for a few minutes in traffic, for example. So you're the driver sitting in your car and you have to stop just for a few minutes while waiting in traffic. What are the chances that you would nod off? Even if it is just a second or 2 seconds. Okay, so you would have scored yourself between 0 and 3 for each of those. And you will then add up those scores, and it would be then out of 24. So I'll just give you a quick chance to do that, and then we'll have a look at the interpretation of some of those scores. And this is just going to give you an idea of whether your daytime sleepiness is at a normal level and an average level. Some of us do just feel sleepy through the day or certain times of the day or in certain activities, and it's okay. But if it is more severe and requires medical attention or some more investigation, that will also give you an idea. So the first range, if you scored between 0 and 7, it's unlikely that you're abnormally sleepy. 8 to 9, so just above 7, you have an average amount of daytime sleepiness. So this is okay. We're not worrying. If you score between 10 and 15, you may be excessively sleepy depending on the situation, you may want to consider seeking medical attention. Okay, so this is on the brink, where you have to start thinking about if it's going to get worse, or if you've got things under control, and if you can get that under control fairly quickly. Otherwise, you're looking at a 16 to 24, and that means you are excessively sleepy, so it's too much, and you should consider seeking medical attention. So it's possible that you just have poor sleep hygiene, you're drinking too much coffee, you're having a cigarette before bed, or you're uncomfortable, or you've got a bed partner that snores and keeps you awake, those kinds of things. So it could just be something that's fairly fixable. Or this could also mean that there's an underlying sleep disorder, and in which case it's very important to get under wraps, as we explored on Tuesday. Okay, so now I encourage sharing of the scoring if you'd like, but we can perhaps do that in our breakaway groups because there's quite a few people. So Marina, I don't know if you want to just take over introducing the first breakaway. I'll just go to the next slide.
So yes, Tanya, I think it's quite important for us as leaders to understand this concept of sleep, because in that first slide that you showed, it's actually not just productivity that is impacted directly by something like nodding off in the middle of the day, but also things like relationships. And I'm thinking about, us sitting here this afternoon at 2 o'clock, and how just sitting across from a screen is not conducive to being wide awake and alert, but that it's actually that a screen itself has an impact on being alert and productive. Can you share with us a little bit more about that in terms of the impact of the screens on our productivity? Just to throw a question in here before we go into our breakaway.
Sure, because we have gone a bit quickly. So yes, there is quite a lot of research on the use of screens, and especially recently, of course, with most people working from home. So if we look at typically before COVID or before lockdown and working from home so much, you would typically be in an office that with colleagues, and a typical routine in a corporate environment would be to initially be in front of the computer, maybe go and get a cup of coffee and get a break from that, come back to the computer, take a break because you've got a phone call and you want to go have it outside, go back in front of the computer, take a break, go have a meeting, come back to the computer. So there's a lot of breaks, even just having a chat with the person next to you and taking your eyes off the screen. And of course, now, as we know, we are all in front of the screen, and meetings and socializing all happen through the screen. And we are less likely to take breaks. Some people are less likely to take breaks during the day. We don't notice the time going by. We're maybe more comfortable at home, so we don't need to get up and do things. We're kind of just relaxing more. I'm sure people with children at home have a different way of seeing it, which brings on other stresses. But looking at the digital, what we call digital fatigue, is that the screens emit blue light. You know this. So the blue wavelength that comes from the screen puts strain on our eyes if we have it all day long. So we want the blue light from the sunshine and the natural sunlight in the beginning of the day to help us with alertness. And then we need that change and that rhythm of changing color light, changing of the color of light, to help us to not be on high alert and hyper vigilant all day long. So there's two aspects, there's two effects really mainly that come with digital fatigue. The one is eye fatigue. So literally on the physical wellness of your eyes, you're going to have more tired eyes. You might have redness of the eyes, showing that you have not, perhaps that there's not enough moisture, and so you might experience pain in the eyes as well. So this we call digital fatigue, and it's eye fatigue, and it's very, very bad for the development in children, but also the maintenance of health of the eye over time. and we are starting to see higher degradation, decreasing function of eyesight, for example, in people who are using screens so much. And then the other side of it is the digital fatigue on the body and the mind. So it becomes quite a monotonous activity. And we all know as humans, we need a little bit of creativity, we need a little bit of change through the day. It's important for us to interact with people, to interact with different environments and different objects through the day, to keep ourselves fresh, and also to have downtime. So being in front of our screens all day long is limiting us to how much time we have for downtime, if I put it that way. We become glued to the screen, and we kind of get into this big dark hole that we can't get out of very easily. So yeah, so I think that's the effect on fatigue during the day. We're going to have much lower energy. We're not maybe exercising and getting up, even just getting up to walk to the kitchen to go make that cup of coffee several times, or tea several times in the day at work, at the office. We're not doing that perhaps anymore. So yeah, it's those little things, and they add up over time. And then when you're struggling with fatigue during the day, you've got fatigue and you've got high alertness at the same time. So what I mean by that is the brain is hypervigilant. It's got a lot of cortisol running through it to try and stay alert, to try and take in all this information all the time. But your brain just doesn't have the capacity for it anymore because it's fatigued. And that affects sleep as well, because we are messing with our hormones and we're messing with those levels of alertness during the day. And so when we want to go to sleep, we might be absolutely exhausted, but maybe we can't fall asleep, and it's just because we haven't come down, we haven't had enough downtime in the day to now switch off. I hope that answers what you wanted.
It definitely does. Thank you very much. And I think it leads us into now, colleagues, we use these breakaway sessions for you to reflect a little bit on the topic at hand and how it impacts you personally. We use the frame of mind or the frame of reference in terms of leadership to say that you will be able to lead your teams better if you also can connect with this information personally. So we really invite you in this breakaway session to reflect a little bit on how well and how refreshed do you feel when you wake up in the mornings. And it's maybe different in different mornings, of course, but generally, how many hours of sleep are you getting regularly? What type of sleep patterns are you maintaining? And how do you know when you haven't had enough good sleep? Are you tracking it in any way? So just share a little bit with your colleagues. We're going to break out again in groups, in small groups, so we can open up this conversation among us on sleep. I know sleep is a personal thing. It is something that we generally may not talk about at work, but that is all part of this Inner Core series, is to put conversations on the table that you as leaders should have, and that you can then also have with your colleagues and with your team members to really strengthen the core. So we're going to break away in this first breakaway for again 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and reflect a bit on that and continue to talk about the culture of sleep at work. So what an interesting conversation around sleep discipline and how impactful sleep can be. So I trust you all had a good conversation. Back to you, Tanya. Thank you. You're still on mute.
There we go. Thank you. So I assume you can still see my screen. Let me just go to the next slide. Oopsie. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is in the next session. So we thought about our own sleep, thought about whether we've got strengths around sleep or some of the weaknesses and the difficulties we might be facing. So that can give us quite a nice level of empathy.
We can't see your screen shared.
Oh, that's strange. It must have gone out. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. There we go. All good.
Yes,
Okay,
all good.
Okay, so now what we've got to think about as leaders is how to instill that culture of sleep health. So looking after ourselves from a sleep perspective as well. We often talk about exercise and we talk about dieting. We even now are starting to talk about mental health. And another topic that needs to be brought up is sleep. So as Marina alluded to earlier, it's not a common conversation that we have about asking other people how they're sleeping. So I just want to give you an example of how little people think about sleep. Have you ever heard of, it's quite common, have you ever heard of somebody sadly passing away who is sort of youngish, maybe in their 50s or even 40s, and they have a heart attack? And somebody says, I don't understand how this person died. They were the most healthy. They ate really well. They did marathons. They were always training. Yeah, I just don't understand how this person got so sick. And one question we never ask or comment we make is, how were they sleeping? Because we always talk about fitness and talk about diet, and we forget that sleep is so important for recovery. So if you are eating correctly and you are exercising well, but you are not getting good sleep, it's a third pillar that cannot and that needs to stand with the other two to ensure overall health. So let's just keep that in the back of our minds when we're looking at health, is that it does play a big part. So in the workplace, most companies have a bottom line, right? And that is profit. So we want to make money, we want to grow, we want to reach all the ends of the earth. And to do this, we need productive, motivated, and well employees. And that means that these employees need good sleep, good exercise, good diet, and good mental wellness. So in other words, if we don't have those things in place, we cannot expect our employees to be productive and motivated, and therefore it is going to have an impact on our economical cost. It will have an economical cost. And workplaces tend to encourage fast-paced working, after-hours work, and poor health management. Think about when meetings are put in place. People will say, I don't have time for another meeting. Let's meet at 7 a.m. before I go to work. Or let's meet at 6 p.m. After I'm done with my work. And it just carries on and on like that. And we don't tend to get to projects and things like that during the day because we've maybe got too many meetings, and then we end up having to work after hours. So this is often actually encouraged in workplaces. And of course, that's going to only take away from our time for sleep and winding down. Working long and late hours is actually seen as heroic or hardworking. People will boast about this. They will say, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night because I was working on this, and we give noddy badges for that. And people are almost incentivized to make sure that they get, as little sleep as possible to show that they are working hard. And this is a terrible, terrible mentality, because obviously it's not good for the employee, but it's also in the long term is going to affect the productivity. So yes, you may complete your work that night, but if that's going to become habit, your overall productivity is definitely going to take a toll. So that may have been a topic that came up in your groups now. Something else that's frowned upon is napping, and it's actually seen as lazy. But napping can have a really, really impactful effect for sleep-deprived people, and in terms of productivity. So there's been lots of people in history like Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, and some of these people were known, so just from records, we're able to see that they didn't get a typical 7 to 9 hours sleep at night. What they would do is try and sleep through the day, or in little bouts. So they might get 2 hours here and 2 hours there and 2 hours there, because they were always working, they were always on, but they did obviously know they need sleep. And what they found is that, so Da Vinci, for example, when he was working on a problem, I think it was Da Vinci, I might be wrong, sorry about this, but when he was sitting and working on a problem and he needed to solve, he would allow himself to sit and fall asleep. And he would hold like a ball bearing in his hand, so something with a little bit of weight, and he would hold it with a light grip. And as soon as he fell asleep, it would fall out of his hand so that it would wake him up. It would land on the floor and it would wake him up with the sound. So that he only allowed himself to fall asleep for that 1 or 2 seconds. And he found that he could always find a solution to the problem that he was pondering about just before that. And this became a little trick of his. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that napping, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, power naps of 20 to 30 minutes, can actually improve our productivity more than a stimulant like coffee or Red Bull, and more than medication can. So that's been studied quite nicely. And there's ways to implement napping into a work day that does not actually interrupt the productivity, but enhances the productivity. So that's something that you might want to explore further as a leader of your team, that we can talk more about it if you like later. And unfortunately, the other part of workplace culture is unrealistic leadership examples that we have. So for example, Martha Stewart, she swears by 4 to 5 hours per night. Tom Cook, the CEO of Apple, he prides himself on getting up before 4 a.m. Donald Trump gets about 3 to 4 hours per night. And we call this, there's lots of examples of successful people who are doing well with the less than recommended amount of sleep. And we call this the Thatcher gene. That's because Margaret Thatcher was also one of these people who got 4 hours a night. And it happens to be less than 1% of the population that have this gene, that they can function quite well on less than 6 hours of sleep a night. But this is certainly, so these become our examples, but this is certainly not the rule. These are all the exceptions. And the problem, obviously, is that we all want to be as successful as these people. And so they become our people that we look up to, and we start to do the things that they do to help, to see if that will help us as well. And of course, we struggle because we have this daytime sleepiness on 4 hours of sleep a night. So I would just assume that you are not part of that 1% if you are struggling with any kind of daytime sleepiness. Okay, so now looking at leadership in sleep health. So how do we lead our teams to developing a culture of sleep health? I'm going to go through some ideas that are from literature and from reviews. But of course, there are many solutions, and there are many ways to address this. And so we're going to, in our second breakaway session, we will look at some of these ideas. So we might have conversations. We should have conversations that normalize sleeping 7 to 9 hours per night. So in the workplace, during meetings, asking people how they slept, are they getting enough? Checking in. So from time to time, checking in with people who might be high risk, or people who have been absent a lot or showing lower productivity. Checking in on their sleep is important. And then as a leader, being an example. So being an example of somebody who takes their sleep seriously and prioritizes sleep above workload. We can introduce educational content. So this can obviously be in the form of flyers and readers or emails, or attending these kinds of programs. We can introduce supportive processes for sleep-deprived employees, such as healthcare access, and making sure that people have access to doctors who might be able to diagnose a sleep disorder or to go to a sleep lab. Making adaptations to work hours and work demands. And this is really important. So for somebody who really is sleep deprived or struggling with a sleep disorder, it must be known to their managers so that things like when they're expected to work might be adjusted while they're getting their lives back on track or treating disorder. And also the work demands can be adapted at the time. And then we want to prioritize health above workload, work speed, and work hours. So health is way more important than all these things, and is important as a cornerstone to ensure that all of these things are addressed optimally. We can also do environmental adaptations that enhance alertness, such as the right lighting in the office. Some lighting can really cause extra fatigue. Some lighting can be too alerting. Some offices don't have windows, and the natural light is so important. So we can look at things like that. So what I'd like to introduce to you next is a little bit on who needs it. So who needs this this attention? So what should we look out for? We're going to look out for employees who have excessive daytime sleepiness. So example, falling asleep in meetings or at their desk, struggling to get through a day alert without the use of stimulants or medication. So they're having many cups of coffee per day, or Red Bull or other energy drinks, or they're using recreational drugs for energy and motivation. They might be struggling to get to sleep without use of sedatives or alcohol. This you would only know through conversation. Are they drinking over the limit regularly? And do they complain of tiredness or having a hard time sleeping? Their work productivity is affected. So somebody who's becoming slower over time, they complaints from their team of slacking and perhaps multitude of inaccuracies in their work. Work relationships start taking a toll, so you might see a change in their usual interpersonal behavior. You might see irritability and short-temperedness, and they might seem inconsiderate or irresponsible. They may even have disinterest in socializing with colleagues, whether that's during the workday or after the workday. And this would be abnormal for them. Obviously, some people just don't do that, but if this is seen as a change. And lastly, we want to look at safety, if their safety is at risk. So if you've got team members who are driving home when they appear very tired, or operating machinery after having minimal sleep. So what we're going to do in the breakaway is we're going to look at some ideas. I'm just going to put some up here to get you thinking, and then you can have a chance. So perhaps you will look at implementing reminders at the coffee station. So to limit your caffeine intake after 3 p.m. or have alternatives to drink other than coffee. Setting an example regarding working later to the night. So don't plan meetings after hours. Encouraging responsible driving, as we said. Maybe people can have a power nap before they head home. And there is some way to do that. Checking up regularly if it's obvious that this person is struggling. Encouraging exposure to sunlight. So this is wonderful. Have meetings outside. Make sure you go outside for your lunch and your tea, not sitting at your desk. So get that break from the screen, get that break from work, but also get the benefits of sitting in the sunshine for sleep, but also for health. And maybe regular corporate wellness health checks. And those health checks ensure that if there's nurses or there's health professionals coming in to do wellness checks, that they do ask and screen for sleep problems. So these are just some ideas. If you want to go and think about some more, we can maybe do that in groups now. If you have ideas for creating a sleep health culture. So Marina, if you want to take over.
So thank you, Tanya. Yes, colleagues, so here's where we now need to make this practical in our teams as well. So we talk about a sleep culture, and even while listening to Tanya, I'm wondering if that even works, to have sleep part of work. But I think from listening to Tanya, it makes sense that sleep is such a fundamental way of improving productivity and improving mood and improving wellness. Within each other and being social beings and being in a team, there's a very strong way that we can support one another in creating these good sleep habits. So we want to hand this over to you as the leaders in, first of all, talking about this ideas for creating a sleep health culture in the Brol workplace. It's at the same level of well-being as the previous topics that we've had. It has a direct impact on mental well-being, for instance, and you'll remember Dr. Kanye speaking about this, how important sleep is to support well-being and also goal achievement and productivity. So in your teams, in the small breakaway groups, we'd like you to share with one another, what ideas do you have for creating a sleep health culture in Brol? Is this something that is present in your teams? And how would you want to go about implementing this? So while you're busy in the breakaway group, please make mental notes of what you say and what your colleagues are saying. And when you're coming back, we're going to ask you to post those in the chat box. While you're actually in the breakout room, you can also post it in the chat box, because we also use these sessions to get ideas from you as leaders that could be potentially implemented across the team as we share ideas with one another. So thank you. We'll see you in 10 minutes time back here in the main room.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for going into your groups. And yeah, Marina, if you want to facilitate the feedback, that would be awesome.
Yes, thank you. Let me just organize my screen here. Okay, so colleagues, thank you very much for that conversation we've had. I've had quite a few insights into the person that I shared the room with. And what I'd like you to do now is we're going to do a quick poll while you share your questions. Tanya, if you can maybe just stop sharing, I'm going to share the Menti poll. Thank you. So we'd like to know from you, just, and you probably are quite au fait with Menti by now, so you can navigate to www.menti.com on your browser, on your laptop, or on your mobile phone. We'd like you to then use the code 47098276. And if you are then in that Menti session, we'd like you to just indicate to us to what extent you agree with the following. You as a leader who's attending this session, I am a good example of healthy sleep habits to my team. So is it a definite yes from your side, or a definite no, or anything in between? The second question is, I've noted the impact of poor sleep habits in my team. Have you seen anything like that? And from this talk also, did you note anything that you could be on the lookout for that you are seeing in your team? And how supportive is your team internally on good sleep habits with one another? The colleague that I spoke to said that actually it's not something to be discussed at all in their team. It's not something that comes up. And she asked me whether it is something that organizations talk about. So Tanya, maybe to you, how often do organizations talk about sleep and the importance of that?
In my experience, it's not much at all. As I said earlier, corporate wellness of late spends a lot of time on exercising, fitness, and dieting, or at least a healthy diet, and mental wellness has become important. So obviously the offshoot of all of those things is going to be sleep, or perhaps the first stepping stone should be sleep. But organizations are not speaking much about it. However, there's a lot more campaigning, there's a lot more awareness, especially in social media, on this kind of thing, like productivity and its relationship to sleep, because there's been a lot of exploration around the impact of sleep on performance in terms of sporting performance and fitness and recovery. And so how sleep can support that. But only now we are starting to see a little bit more interest in sleep and productivity. And it is because, like you said, Marina, they are kind of foreign or they're not related concepts in our minds. Sleep and work happen at opposite times, and often we sacrifice one for the other. So we don't talk about them as working together. And this is really important because, yes, they are separate activities, but they both need our attention, and possibly sleep needs to be prioritized more than work at times, for most of the time, I would say. So yeah, I think it needs to start becoming a daily or a regular conversation between colleagues. You know, how are you? But how are you, and how are you sleeping is an important question.
Yeah. So the same way that exercise used to be a personal thing, and we wouldn't talk about how much you exercise. It's we should be seeing those trends around mental well-being and sleep as a very important component of that, right? So very interesting to see. The leaders in our group at the moment are saying that they may not be that good examples of sleep habits to their teams, although they've seen the impact of poor sleep habits possibly in their teams. But they feel that their team can support one another better in terms of good sleep habits. It caught my attention when you talked about the micro sleep moments. Is that the right way to say that? And I've actually, can you extend for us a little bit on that? Because that's maybe something that we may all be experiencing, but are not actually aware of.
Yeah, so basically, when you are sleep deprived, we talk about a concept called sleep debt. And it's really losing sleep is going to build up sleep debt. It's the need that your brain needs that sleep. So something quite interesting is that, you know, we can go 4 days without food, and we would probably die of lack of sleep before we would die of starvation. And that's what the research is now showing. So sleep is paramount to our survival. So you can then imagine the body not getting enough food. What does it start to do? It starts to digest its own fat stores. You know, it starts to mobilize things if it's not getting new food. And so we start losing our stores. And with sleep, when we experiencing a build of sleep debt, the brain is eventually going to need to somehow start catching that up for survival. So we start to experience these micro sleeps, and that's why it is a sign of quite severe sleepiness. And all that's really happening is the brain is switching into sleep mode very, very briefly and very, very involuntarily, and trying to catch up little bits of rest and sleep. There's not much, it's not going to be very, it's not very effective in terms of catching up sleep because it is such short moments. But I guess you can look at it as, your brain overriding. You know, it's just saying, well, you are not doing what I need you to do, and you are refusing to listen to my cues. So I'm going to just put you to sleep. And so we experience a sort of, it feels like a loss of consciousness in a way, but you only really realize it afterwards when you kind of go, what just happened in the last few seconds? And I think we've all probably experienced that before, where you lose complete awareness of your surroundings for a second or 2 seconds. So yeah, I think the significance of understanding or knowing about that is to be aware of, if you are experiencing that, your brain is really trying to tell you something, and you should listen. But you need to lie down and sleep properly.
Yeah. So colleagues, you're welcome to type any questions that you have to Tanya in the chat box around sleep, or also then continue to the next slide on the Menti poll that is asking, what did you find helpful about the session? We're coming to the end of the session. I have more questions from my side, whilst you also type your questions. So Tanya, I think a controversial thing, or maybe not so controversial, but a big ask always is, should I get help to sleep better? Should I use medication, or should I use natural supplements? What's the answer to that if you're battling to sleep?
Yeah, so I think what we always look at as health professionals is we first decide if something is possibly a disorder or just on the side of abnormal. And so we're going to get normal sleep, which means you are getting enough, you're getting good quality sleep, and perhaps 7 to 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Or normal sleep is still constituted as waking up once or twice at night for a quick loo break or whatever, but going back to sleep quite easily. Or abnormal sleep where perhaps you're struggling to get to sleep quick enough, you're waking up feeling unrefreshed, or you're struggling to get through the day without a nap. And then we start looking at sleep disorder. And so sleep disorder really just means that the lack of sleep or sleep deprivation is impacting on your function. So Is it impacting on your, for example, productivity, like we've spoken about today? Can you see that happening? Are you forgetful? Are you just forgetting a lot of things, which is going to impact all kinds of parts of our function? Is it affecting our relationships? So am I irritable every single day that my relationship is taking a toll, my marriage or my children are getting the brunt of it, for example? So that's when we start considering that there might be something dysfunctional, so something that needs to be addressed medically. So you can sort of maybe take a step back and have a look at this yourself. But if you're not sure and you want to reach out, I would say first go to discuss it with your GP, so somebody who is overseeing your medical wellness, or a nurse. So somebody who knows you fairly well, maybe knows what medication you're taking, because sometimes these things can even just be a side effect of some of the medications that we're taking, actually, or other chemicals that interact with our brains and make it harder for us to go to sleep or make us really tired during the day. So it's important to first go that route. And then you can suggest to your GP, if they don't, that you're interested in maybe doing a sleep study because you think your snoring might be a problem, or perhaps you're interested in seeking out something like sleep therapy or sleep coaching, sleep training, whatever you want to call it, from a behavioral practitioner who can help you then implement changes in your own routine and your habits. And a lot of us need help with that. It's really difficult to make changes, and there could be quite a lot of changes that you need to make, and that's obviously going to be over a long period of time. And it's very helpful to have a coach through that, or a therapist alongside you to just keep you on track, to make sure they've got your best health at heart, and that they're thinking about all the factors that play a role in your health, not only sleep, but they're looking at you as a whole person. And I think that that's really, really helpful, because it's not easy, as I said, it's not easy to make change. And often we end up giving up quite easily when we don't see the changes that we want in the time frame that we want. So yeah, I would really recommend help if you are struggling at the moment. And also because if you have been on Tuesday's session, you will remember me talking about the effects of sleep deprivation, and it's not simply tiredness, and it's not simply a horrible feeling for the day or irritability. It's got serious long-term effects on health, physical health, chronic disease, and mental illness as well, if that is something that you are at high risk for. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Okay, excellent. Great. Thank you very much. I see we're getting some feedback here that echoes what you're saying. People taking note of creating a good sleep routine is important, that we need to speak about these things, that it is really important also for our general health and the impact of it. So colleagues, I'd like to conclude this session by just stating again, we started off with the sessions around general well-being. We talked about brain well-being, and all of the well-being, all of the cores are really supported by healthy sleep habits, because that is where we regenerate, and where literally our cells get regenerated as we sleep. And that's why we also chose to end the course in the course series with this topic of health. It's underrated and under talked about, but something that we wanted to put on your radar to be aware of and take note of and start that conversation with your team. Thank you, Andile, for the opportunity, and thank you for allowing us to facilitate this session.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to extend a big well thank you to you, Marina and Tanya, for affording us your time. It has been lovely and so informative to talk about this topic this week. Hope today's session was useful to everyone. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave you with the following quote from Adam Grant. It says that in unhealthy cultures, people see rest as taking your foot off the gas pedal. You don't stop until you've pushed yourself to the brink of exhaustion. In healthy cultures, though, people see rest as a vital source of fuel. You take regular breaks to maintain energy and avoid burnout. Until next time, remember we're in this together, even though we're apart. Take care and goodbye. Bye.